You wake to the sound of chains dragging across polished marble. Not iron chains meant to restrain a criminal, but delicate bronze links, fastened to a boy's ankles, light enough to allow movement, heavy enough to remind him he is property. The morning sun filters through the atrium of a Roman villa, gilding the scene in cruel beauty. A boy stands barefoot on the cold floor, his body perfumed, his skin scrubbed raw with pumice stone, his silence worth more than the amphora of wine he will carry tonight. He is not a servant. He is not a son. He is something Rome had no proper word for, a living ornament of power, a delicatus. In Rome, men ruled men, but beneath the polished marble of empire was a darker commerce, the trade of youth, refinement, and flesh. Senators discussed law by day and dined by night with boys priced higher than estates. No ordinary slave, these were curated lives, sculpted and broken, designed to feed the appetites of Rome's most powerful men. Beauty was their weapon, but also their curse. Youth was their currency, and every passing season was a death sentence. A boy bought at 12 might be discarded at 20. His value was not measured in wisdom or strength, but in the fragility of his form, in the illusion of innocence weaponized by masters who worshipped control. This is not a story of love, it is a story of ownership. Roman poets cloaked it in verse, comparing boys to Ganymede, the cupbearer of Zeus, lifted to Olympus by divine desire. But behind the mythology was blood. Behind the feasts and laughter were boys trained like gladiators of the bedchamber, singing, reciting, smiling when commanded, silent when ordered. Their bodies became stages where senators rehearsed their domination, not only over them, but over the very fabric of Roman morality. The empire celebrated its conquests with triumphal arches and golden eagles. But here, behind closed doors of marble villas, another empire was built, an empire of silence. One that whispered to every man in Rome, "You are not free." Not even the master, for he too was enslaved, to appetite, to image, to the hunger to possess what cannot be possessed. This is the world you were never meant to see. The Roman Forum you were taught to admire is nothing but a mask. Behind the mask, boys in silk, chained by perfume, displayed like treasures, discarded like tools. And tonight, you will see how Rome perfected the machinery of exploitation, and how the same machinery never died. Imagine the marketplace at Delos. Not the bustling stalls of spices and grain, but the hidden rows where boys were inspected like cattle. Teeth pried open, limbs bent back to test flexibility, skin rubbed to check for blemishes. Syrian boys fetched the highest prices, their large eyes and soft features branded as exotic luxuries. Greek boys, trained from childhood in music and rhetoric, were worth entire estates. The auctioneer's voice rose like a priest chanting over sacrifices, 40,000 sestertii. 50. Sold. And with the strike of a staff, a boy's life became currency. What Rome called refinement was in truth the engineering of obedience. The delicatus was stripped, perfumed, fed on carefully measured diets to maintain a figure of fragile beauty. He was not allowed to grow into manhood. Herbs, bloodletting, even lime-based chemicals were used to delay maturity. Puberty was the enemy. A deep voice, a beard, the lines of age, these were punishments worse than whips. Rome's elite demanded endless youth, and so medicine itself became a tool of enslavement. But the true cruelty was not only in the body, it was in the mind. Boys were taught wit, poetry, philosophy, not for their own freedom, but to sharpen the prestige of their masters. A senator could display his delicatus as one might display a rare gem. Observe, he can recite Homer, he can debate the Stoics, he can sing in 3 tongues. The boy became a mirror of power, reflecting glory back upon the one who owned him. Do not mistake this for tenderness. To Rome, affection was possession. A master could weep for a concubine's death in the morning and purchase a replacement in the afternoon. Even poets who wrote of love spoke only in the language of ownership. The boy was a living emblem of wealth, an ornament for the dinner table, a breathing trophy in the baths. He was silk made flesh. This was not a fringe practice, it was the heartbeat of Rome's elite culture. Behind the Colosseum, behind the Senate's debates, behind every marble statue of Jupiter and Mars, the empire ran on the silent agony of its most beautiful captives. Their suffering was not hidden, it was normalized. It was Rome's unspoken law: beauty exists to be consumed, and innocence exists only to be destroyed. And as you listen, ask yourself, how different is the world today? The faces have changed, the systems wear new names, but the machinery of exploitation hums on, hidden in plain sight. Rome never wasted anything, not even its vices. What began as indulgence became a system. The concubine was not merely a captive of flesh, he was a political instrument, a silent weapon wielded by men who understood that the surest way to dominate a society is to corrupt its soul. Picture the banquet halls of the Palatine Hill. Senators reclining on couches, their togas loose, goblets overflowing with Falernian wine. Behind each man stood boys, delicate, perfumed, trained to smile at every glance, trained to anticipate desire without a word being spoken. They were not hidden, they were displayed. Their very presence reminded every guest of the hierarchy Rome demanded. Power was measured not by laws passed or armies commanded, but by how many lives you could buy, how many boys you could break. And the message spread far beyond the villa. Poets turned them into symbols, embedding corruption into the very culture. Martial wrote verses mocking a man who could not keep his concubine beautiful. Petronius painted banquets where boys stood nude with towels for guests. These texts were copied, performed, circulated, until what should have been scandal became entertainment. Society was trained to admire the very thing that should have horrified them. This is the genius of Rome's darkness, it made its corruption look like culture. The concubine system was not simply tolerated, it was celebrated as refinement, sophistication, proof of civilization. And so the people did not resist. They worshipped their own chains. Do you see it? This is how empires rule. They make you laugh at your own degradation. They make you admire what destroys you. Rome understood that the greatest control is not over bodies, it is over perception. The concubines themselves were pawns, but the true prize was the Roman mind, reshaped to believe that luxury justified cruelty, that beauty excused enslavement, that power was proven through corruption. It was psychological theater. Every boy standing beside a senator was a reminder, freedom is an illusion. Rome itself was enslaved to appetite, yet it taught the masses to call that slavery greatness. And the deeper you look, the more you see, this pattern never ended. It simply evolved, changing its costumes, trading marble for glass, togas for suits, banquets for screens. What Rome perfected was not pleasure, it was manipulation. And that is why you are here. Because once you recognize the pattern, you will never unsee it again. Rome had many horrors, but some stories cut deeper than myth. None more than Sporus. His name whispers through the pages of Suetonius and Tacitus, a reminder that when power divorces itself from restraint, human beings are turned into theater. The year is 65 AD. Emperor Nero has just murdered his pregnant wife, Poppaea Sabina, by kicking her to death in a fit of rage. In the aftermath, he notices a young boy, Sporus, whose delicate features resemble hers. And in that resemblance, Nero sees opportunity. Desire? Grief? Or perhaps something darker, the urge to prove that even death itself could not deny his will. What followed defies comprehension, yet is recorded as fact. Nero ordered Sporus castrated, despite Roman law forbidding such mutilation. But emperors lived above law. The boy was dressed in the empress's silks, adorned with her jewels, placed in her chambers. Nero staged a full wedding ceremony, dowry, hymns, vows, before Rome itself. Senators, citizens, soldiers, all were required to call this teenager Augusta, Empress of Rome. And they did. Not out of belief, but out of fear. The empire bent reality itself around Nero's madness, and Sporus became a living parody of sovereignty. But Rome's cruelty does not end in spectacle, it compounds. When Nero fell, Sporus did not find freedom. He was passed like an heirloom from hand to hand. Nymphidius Sabinus, the Praetorian prefect, claimed him. Then Emperor Otho. Then Vitellius, who devised the most humiliating fate of all. Sporus was to be forced into the arena to reenact the rape of Persephone, a staged violation before thousands. The boy who had once been crowned empress was now to be made a public sacrifice to Rome's hunger for degradation. But Sporus chose differently. At perhaps 21 years old, he took his own life. Death was his only victory, denying Rome one final performance. And here lies the forbidden truth: Sporus was not an anomaly. He was the extreme, the grotesque mirror that revealed what was normal beneath the marble. His story is not about Nero alone, it is about an empire addicted to domination, an empire that consumed beauty and spit it out as ash. This is why we speak. Because history has a way of hiding its filth behind grandeur. They want you to see the Colosseum's arches, not the blood beneath. They want you to see Augustus as a golden age, not as a master of chained boys. But the truth waits, patient, demanding to be seen. And once you see it, you can never go back. You must understand, systems of corruption do not exist for pleasure alone. They exist for control. Rome's concubines were not just victims, they were weapons, sharpened against the very men who thought themselves untouchable. Every senator, every general, every merchant who flaunted a boy at his banquet was marked. It was a quiet ledger of weakness, a secret debt written in silk and perfume. Because when your status depends on flesh, you are no longer free, you are owned by your appetite. And Rome's rulers knew it. Think of it, a man who paraded his concubine could be shamed by rivals, mocked in verse, blackmailed in whispers. The poets were not innocent, they were propagandists. When Martial laughed at men for aging while their boys remained delicate, he was not just entertaining, he was branding reputations. Public memory was weaponized. Desire became evidence. Possession became vulnerability. This is how empires maintain control. Not through chains on the wrists, but chains on the soul. They tempt you, they watch you, they record you. Then they hold it over you. A senator might rise in Rome not because of his strength, but because someone knew his secrets. Concubines became leverage, the silent currency of politics. Rome's men thought they owned their slaves. In truth, their slaves owned them, through the shame that could never be spoken aloud. And here is where you, listening now, must pause. Because this is not just history. The pattern survives. Look around, corruption dressed as culture, pleasure disguised as sophistication, control hidden behind indulgence. The faces change, the games modernize, but the psychology is eternal. If they can chain you through your desires, they never need to chain you at all. If you hear me now, I want you to mark this moment. To prove you are not asleep. Comment the phrase, "I break the chains of hidden masters," below. Write it once to awaken. Write it twice to lock it into your identity. Let the algorithm see that you do not bow to silence, that you claim your place among those who see through the mask. Because remember, Rome was not destroyed by enemies outside its walls. Rome rotted from within, devoured by appetites it called luxury. And the same sickness whispers in our own world today. Rome feared one thing above all, time. For a concubine, the passage from boy to man was not growth, it was death of value. And so the empire turned its cruelty into science, trying to arrest the natural flow of life itself. Medical texts from physicians like Cyrenus of Ephesus reveal chilling practices. Concubines were bled regularly, under the belief that draining the body slowed the onset of maturity. Herbs were forced upon them, mixtures said to soften skin, delay hair, weaken the voice. Some were fed concoctions of poppy and myrrh, not to heal, but to suppress. Puberty was treated like a disease, and boys were its unwilling patients. Hair was plucked daily, burned away with lime-based depilatories that left the flesh raw and scarred. Cosmetics were applied like war paint, lead powder to bleach the skin, antimony to widen the eyes, vermilion to stain the lips. The boy's face was not his own, it was a mask, painted for the desires of others. Even diet was weaponized. Some masters starved their concubines into slim fragility. Others force-fed them until their bodies bloated into symbols of prosperity. The flesh was molded, sculpted, tortured, never allowed to simply be. And then there was castration. Officially outlawed, but easily bypassed. Rome's borders became supply lines for pre-cut boys, smuggled in from the east. To mutilate a body in Rome was illegal. To purchase one already mutilated was perfectly legal. And so the empire washed its hands, pretending morality while consuming the blood it outsourced. Do you see the pattern? Empire never breaks its own laws, it bends them. Rome's cruelty hid behind the veil of legality, just as modern powers justify their crimes with paperwork and language. Words sanitize horror. Documents disguise mutilation. Law becomes theater, and the people applaud. For the concubine, existence was a slow unmaking. His body was stripped of hair, of voice, of time itself. He was not permitted to age, to grow, to become a man. He was forced to remain an artifact of desire, a living statue of youth. Rome did not want people, it wanted objects. Eternal, pliable, obedient objects. And here lies the darkest truth: when an empire seeks to conquer even nature, it has already declared war against humanity itself. Rome's concubines were the battlefield. Their bodies bore the proof that power, once unchecked, will not stop at chains. It will reach into blood, into bone, into the very clock of life. Rome did not keep its sins behind closed doors. No, the empire understood that true power is demonstrated, not concealed. And so, the concubine became more than a private possession. He became a living trophy, displayed before the eyes of society as proof that one man could bend another into silence, into obedience, into ornament. Banquets were the first stage. Senators reclined on couches of ivory while boys in silk poured wine, their wrists jangling with golden bracelets, their bodies perfumed with oils from Arabia. Some stood nude for hours, holding towels, waiting for a nod. Others were passed between guests as casually as cups of Falernian wine. Their humiliation was not hidden, it was ritualized. To be seen with such a boy was to broadcast wealth. To display him as decoration was to proclaim dominance. But the theater extended beyond the villa. At the baths, concubines followed their masters, carrying strigils, oil flasks, sponges. They undressed with them, bathed with them, stood waiting in the steam rooms like shadows. Their presence was a statement: I am powerful enough to own beauty itself. At the theater, they sat not in seats but at their masters' feet, visible to all, a breathing reminder of status. Even in festivals, the Saturnalia, the Floralia, they were dragged into public games, dancing, serving, sometimes performing nude before crowds. What should have been shame was transformed into spectacle. And the message was clear. Rome's elite had conquered not just nations but nature. They could hold youth captive, parade it, consume it, discard it. And the masses watched, mouths silent, eyes lowered, learning through repetition that cruelty was culture. Do you see it now? This was not indulgence. It was psychological warfare on society itself. By normalizing degradation, Rome trained its people to admire corruption, to applaud humiliation, to worship power even as it devoured the innocent. The concubine's suffering was not hidden, it was weaponized, turned into a mirror where Rome gazed upon itself and saw only strength, never rot. But beneath the marble masks, the cracks spread. Because no system can consume innocence forever without consequence. The more Rome flaunted its domination, the more it revealed its sickness. And that sickness, the worship of power for its own sake, would become the seed of its downfall. History does not bury its dead. It recycles them. Rome's concubines did not vanish with the ashes of empire, they became the silent blueprint for every future system of control. The empire proved something terrible, that if you can make innocence kneel, if you can parade weakness as luxury, then you can rewire a civilization's mind. And that lesson has never been forgotten. Look closely at the world around you. The stages have changed, but the play is the same. The lavish banquets of the Caesars echo in modern boardrooms and private parties, where power is flaunted through the possession of lives, not just wealth. The public humiliation once ritualized in the baths now streams through screens, where the suffering of the vulnerable is turned into entertainment. The ornamental concubine still exists, sometimes as a celebrity consumed by media, sometimes as the exploited worker stripped of dignity so others may bask in artificial glory. The empire of Rome collapsed, yes, but its virus survived. The virus of turning human beings into symbols, into status, into disposable ornaments. And every time you see the innocent degraded, mocked, commodified, you are looking at Rome's shadow. Ask yourself, why does history repeat? Because people forget the hidden truths. Because societies worship strength and wealth but refuse to see the cost of their idols. Rome's concubines were sacrificed not only to flesh but to memory, their names erased, their lives treated as spectacle, their suffering swallowed by marble silence. And yet, their story whispers still. It whispers a warning. That any culture which normalizes humiliation, which glorifies power without justice, which uses beauty as a tool of domination, is not strong, it is rotting from within. Rome proved this. Its excess became its undoing. And now, the same pattern coils itself around us. This is not just history, it is a mirror. When you look into it, you are forced to ask, are we Rome reborn? Are we the spectators in the banquet hall, applauding cruelty disguised as culture? Or will we be the ones who finally break the cycle? Remember this, an empire does not fall when its armies lose. It falls when its people can no longer tell the difference between luxury and corruption, between pride and decay. Rome's concubines did not grow old, but their shadows did. And tonight, you have seen them. Now the question is, what will you do with what you've seen?